Welcome to Duality Check, the podcast where two brothers embark on a thrilling journey through the realms of scientific inquiry, the enigmatic mysteries of the past, and the uncharted territories of spirituality. Join us as we explore the wonders of our world and beyond, all while embracing the roles of curious bystanders rather than experts. Together we'll unravel the intricate tapestry of existence, blending the dichotomies of knowledge and wonder. Get ready to question, ponder, and delve into the dualities that shape our understanding of reality on Duality Check. I'm Drew.
And I'm Dean. And today we kind of called it an audible.
A little bit, yeah. We had just got back from a little family vacation, which was nice.
We went up to the Redwoods in around California. It's freaking gorgeous.
Beautiful. Yeah, we
had some amazing hikes, and
it was calling for rain while we were there, but we got 2 days in, and it was just like by day 2, it was just like this really cool mist.
Yeah.
It wasn't really a rain until the nighttime. It was more of like a mist, even through your whole hike.
Yeah. It was supposed to rain that entire day, but on the hike, well, I think the trees may have just absorbed a lot of it, but it was just every so often we could feel a little bit of rain, but
it's probably just coming from the canopy.
It was mostly just some mistiness, and a lot of times it didn't rain. So the weather,
going in the Redwoods on
going
a
into the
day.
Weekend, it was just like, it's gonna rain, and we're like, oh no,
doom.
Yeah, so we ended up camping one night, and then we stayed at the Airbnb, the rental house, for the rest of the time.
That's right.
Yeah.
It was fun though, having everybody under one house for a couple nights.
Yeah, we got a big family.
We have a big family. We had some friends there.
Yeah,
it was a good time.
Oh. So
we're playing catch up a little bit.
We're playing a little bit of catch up, but regardless of that, this Joe Rogan episode came out.
Perfect timing.
Perfect timing. As soon as it came out, I texted Drew. I was like, "Hey, you listened to this yet?"
I was like halfway through at the time, and I was like, yeah, because I was supposed to do a lot of reading of the, I was going to do a lot of reading during this trip and stuff, and the boys didn't sleep great, so I was just like, nah, I'm sleeping.
Yeah, right.
I tried to stay up the first night. I read a few pages, but I was just like, nah, this is vacation. So so we were going to do a Secret History of the World episode, obviously. That was our plan. And now, well, I guess not obviously, but since this episode came out with Graham Hancock and Flint Dibble, who's an archaeologist, we were both like, this is a good opportunity to just get it while it's fresh.
Yeah, well, and it was a good test of the ideas. I think it was an interesting debate, and I'm kind of excited to talk about it. But before we get into that, by the way, if you haven't listened to it yet, I'll have the image up on screen here. If you're on a podcast thing that supports that, there'll be a link to the Joe Rogan episode in the show notes.
Yeah, if you want to pause it, listen to it, pause this.
I highly recommend, if you're into this topic of the Younger Dryas and ancient lost civilization, this is a must listen.
Yeah, I know a few friends that'll probably do that if they haven't already.
Yeah.
They're pretty much on top of all this stuff now. But.
Yeah, not that any of you need us to tell you about the Joe Rogan show, but that particular episode, it would be worth a listen before.
Yeah, because some people like I do, you Joe Rogan's such a wide-reaching character now. His reach is so huge because of the wide variety of topics he covers. So there's a lot of people who listen to Joe Rogan, but they listen to a certain facet of Joe Rogan. Like they
That's
listen to the comedian stuff,
I don't
or they
really
listen to the UFC stuff.
I don't listen to that.
And if they're only there for that,
right?
And maybe they'll dabble into some mystery stuff because they know it's fascinating.
Yeah.
But if you haven't already, check out Graham Hancock. He's been on Joe Rogan 5 or 6 times at least, maybe
bunch,
more.
Probably a lot more.
Probably more than that.
I think it's more.
Yeah.
He's been on at least like 3 times with Randall. He's been on a bunch of times by himself.
Yeah, so he's probably
been
like
on a couple of debate episodes.
Yeah, with Michael Shermer.
Yeah.
Twice on that, right?
I think only one with Michael Shermer. That was a good debate too.
Oh yeah, it was only them. That's right. But Randall was there for that one.
Right.
No, that's not true. Remember, they came back with their experts.
Right.
On a different episode, they came back with their experts where it was Graham and another guy he brought in. Or maybe it was the same episode. Maybe I'm thinking of a different. Maybe it is the same episode. I can't remember.
Yeah.
It was a long one. Anyway. Yeah, so the hope for this one, we, which was funny because we just did a ChatGPT and we've been using the AI a little bit. We ran the manuscript or the transcript through ChatGPT.
Dude, such a cool thing. Yeah.
And it took us a minute to find the file we could use, but once Dean found it and plugged it in, it was instantaneous. Literally, like usually you wait for like a little scroll wheel that's like telling you how long it's going to take. It was instantaneous. You clicked enter with the file and a little description of what you would like it to do. You told it to read this transcript and give us a summary based on the most important part or points made by both sides in the argument, and it spit out just the most amazing thing so fast,
like a legitimate summary. It was like, pretty cool,
literally like and this now, fast. If you hear this, like that, he clicked the button and it was popping up with it had already read it, or it had already read it previously. Like I don't know how
it might read it as you upload it.
Oh, like it starts immediately.
Like,
and it reads fast
even
anyway,
before you
so
hit send, possibly.
But it already started spitting out
yeah.
all of the information.
And now we can just ask ChatGPT to answer any questions or things we misremember about the show.
And we're going to have it do a little summary.
Yeah. But before we do that, you said we had a comment?
We did. Well, we have that poem. Do you want to read that?
Yeah. We got a comment on the website on the Einstein's Intuition episode number 10. And this is from Joe at schmo.com. He left a little poem, says, delving into the mysteries of the mind, learning we are all on rewind, absent from being kind, hopefully, ultimately, becoming renowned. Which is cool.
Yeah. Your name here. That's his name.
Yeah. Nice little anonymous poetry. Whoever left that, keep them coming.
Yeah, like that's pretty sick. I would love to have that every episode. Just somebody popping in with a little poem about it.
Didn't you say there was another one? Or
so I had a buddy I've been corresponding with. He, we hang out. We haven't hung out much, but anyway, he has been listening, and he's like, I'm very much enjoying y'all's stuff, so I'm pumped that y'all are doing it. It's definitely a lot of stuff I've never really thought about or just never really knew about, and some things that I have but never really looked into. So I'm having so it's cool. So he's liking it. He's been calling me when there's issues with the podcast. He's like, dude, I'm on my way to work. Like, I started a podcast the other day, and now it's gone. I had to start another one, which I did, but dude, fix that. And so Dean got on it. We have a ticket in with our...
Yeah. It was because of having to republish all the episodes back then. I ended up with some duplicates on the Apple Podcast Connect, and so they have to just sort out the duplicates. But
so it's archiving them both is what you're saying, right?
Yeah, because it doesn't know which one to publish, so it just archives them both. Unfortunately, I don't see any way that I can go in there and like unarchive it. They have to. Yeah. So
we'll get that fixed. Griff,
by the time this is out, it should be fixed. Cool.
We were also, for people who are listening in, but listen to the previous episode, we were a little late on posting that, also due to the family vacation.
Oh, yeah.
And subsequent trying to get things back in order in our households and everything.
Yeah. A couple little family emergencies popped up there. But,
we're getting back on schedule here. So, yeah, do we want to introduce this episode? Or at least the Joe Rogan?
I've got another thing I want to bring up in reference to a couple past episodes. This is just some like follow-up stuff. So if you remember from the Bitcoin episode, where we were talking about what are some of the things that people criticize Bitcoin for the most, and one of them is the energy usage, is that Bitcoin isn't green.
I mentioned basically. That too.
Yeah. So I caught a podcast. The podcast is called The Bitcoin Layer, and there's an episode on it with an interview with this guy named Daniel Batten, and I'll leave a link to the episode. But essentially this guy works for a company called CH4 Capital, and they are, they do like crypto investments, and they're working with a company who has essentially what they figured out to do is they can set up a methane capture system at landfills across the world. And they already have a couple of these in place, I think. So essentially you can set up at one of the biggest thing about landfills is it puts out methane for CO2, global warming, all this crap, right?
Yeah.
And so they can set up a methane capture system, withdraw the methane from the landfill, use it to run a generator, and then have that generator power miners at the landfill.
So there would be miners, because it would have to be nearby, right?
Yeah, so you set some computers up and a thing there attached to that generator that's being run off of the methane being captured in the landfills.
I'm thinking of nicknames for them already. Do capture.
It's a perfect idea because it allows you to get essentially free
trash
energy
miners
for mining. And now you're essentially turning what is normally a waste product into you're
garbage
removing
warriors.
Methane that would normally go into the atmosphere, and you're turning it into a profit. So you now have a financial incentive to reduce pollution at landfills.
I mean, the engine running the methane would still have a exhaust, right?
Yeah, but methane burns different than like gasoline.
What does it produce?
Let's ask ChatGPT.
Yeah. We ain't got time to Google.
In a methane generator, what is the waste product of burning methane?
CO2.
Yeah.
And H2O.
Yeah.
So
when methane CH cord is burned in a methane generator or any other combustion process involving methane, the primary waste products are carbon dioxide CO2 and water H2O. This chemical reaction occurs when methane combines with oxygen O2 from the air. The general chemical equation for the combustion of methane can be expressed as text CH4 plus 2 text O2, right out text CO2 plus 2 text H text O.
Bad.
Here, methane reacts with oxygen to produce carbon dioxide and water vapor. This reaction also releases energy in the form of heat, which is why methane is used as a fuel source.
Right. So essentially, I know that CO2 versus methane is a worse greenhouse gas. So you're at least swapping out one greenhouse gas for a less bad one.
Oh, it's not as bad. I thought.
Yeah, methane is worse. Like it has a stronger greenhouse effect than CO2 does.
Right. So you're making it worse in a sense.
No, you're taking what methane would be going into the air, capturing it, burning it, and converting it into CO2.
Gotcha. Yeah. That's right.
Anyway, this company is going around and essentially reversing. For every one of these they set up, they're able to offset a certain amount of like carbon credits or whatever all this stuff is. But they're essentially trying to get Bitcoin to like a net zero carbon output, so that even like the big governments and the ESG score, concerns in in the world, that's currently like a negative on risk, on Bitcoin's rap sheet. But as this continues to grow, with every one of these landfills that gets set up, it starts to put Bitcoin as a whole, as a network, more carbon neutral. And once they have even like a small percentage of landfills, like they said they're maybe years away from being able to completely make Bitcoin, the entire Bitcoin network, carbon neutral in aggregate.
Yeah, so while you were talking there, I named a few nicknames for the trash warriors or the garbage miners.
Garbage miners. Yeah. But that's pretty cool.
I'm imagining
it's an interesting
them just being
idea.
set up at a dump and just like having its own building. But still, it's just funny.
I mean, imagine like as a company though, like you set up a bunch of equipment at the dump, and then it just generates money for you.
Yeah,
you have to pay for the equipment once, but you'll be getting money back from the mining. So once that is returned, it's all profit because the methane is essentially free.
Essentially, yeah. Unless they decide to start charging a tax on methane captured from landfill, even though they had done nothing before to capture it.
Dude, if they would tax that would be crazy. So I thought that was an interesting story. It's
absolutely.
It's a good thing to know, because if you are into Bitcoin, and you'll hear people give that objection to Bitcoin, that Bitcoin is bad for the environment, but this is turning that argument over, so that won't be a valid argument after a few years of this being developed.
Yeah, because I had asked that question during that podcast, just like how much energy is it, and you said it's exponential, like it's going to continue.
It will continue eating more and more energy. But if the lion's share of its energy is coming from renewable sources, if it's buying off-peak energy, if it's converting what would normally be a pollutant into energy,
what if we get to a point
then
where
Bitcoin mining itself can be turned into something that's good for the environment?
Yeah. Fascinating. We're not too far from putting a banana peel in a flux capacitor and time traveling.
Then there's this other article I found, and I just found it interesting. Maybe you will too. This is on livescience.com. The headline is James Webb Telescope detects light from a small Earth-like planet and finds its missing atmosphere. So the headline doesn't do this justice for some of the crazy headlines you'll get out there. Yeah. I had a buddy come up to me at work. He's like, dude, did you hear? They found
an Earth-like planet.
Yeah, they found an Earth-like planet. And I was like, what? They're like, yeah, they found life or whatever. So I go and I find this article, and it's actually really interesting what it actually is.
How long is it? Pretty short?
Yeah, it's pretty short.
Let's read it.
Yeah. So NASA's James Webb Space Telescope measured the temperature of the Earth-like planet TRAPPIST-1b and found that it is too hot for humans and likely has no atmosphere. 5 years ago, NASA's infrared Spitzer Space Telescope discovered a family of 7 rocky exoplanets orbiting the same star, known as TRAPPIST-1. Now, NASA's new infrared powerhouse, the James Webb Space Telescope, measured the temperature of one of these worlds, TRAPPIST-1b, in new research published in the journal Nature. The bad news, the Earth-like planet is almost certainly uninhabitable. astronomers used JWST's mid-infrared camera called MIRI to look for the planet's thermal emission. Think heat sensing Terminator vision. They found that TRAPPIST-1b is scorching, about 450 degrees Fahrenheit, 232 degrees Celsius, about the temperature of an oven, and that it likely lacks an atmosphere. The discovery is another record-breaking first for JWST, which has been steadily producing newsworthy results since its launch. The first detection of any form of light emitted by an exoplanet is small, or as small and as cool as rocky planets in our own solar system. NASA's official said in the statement, no previous telescopes have ever had the sensitivity to measure such dim mid-infrared light. Oh, no, this is what my friend came in and said. He came in and said the JWST saw lights coming from a planet. So like he was planet. Like, dude, we found life. There's city lights found, but it wasn't city lights. It was light from like an aurora borealis
either that
effect.
Or like a volcano or some massive thing that happened.
Mm-hmm. But it's the first time we detected light being emitted from a planet outside of our solar system, which is pretty cool.
It is pretty cool, yeah. I'm fascinated by all the James Webb Telescope images and stuff. And we'll probably put some in this episode too, just to show some of them.
That might be a fun episode to do, like a James Webb super episode, like assemble all the like crazy science stuff that's come out of it.
Yeah. That would be cool.
Anyway.
Nice.
So
good find. Not
city lights, but still light from another planet, which is cool.
Unless they're just other type of beings that can live in that atmosphere or no atmosphere. Right. Anyway.
All right. So this we'll let ChatGPT summarize the episode here about the debate.
Where are we at on time?
Oh, good call.
Maybe we do this and then
we're at 22.
Yeah, let's do this and
let's get the topic introduced and then we'll take our first break there. Okay.
Here's a summarized outline of the key points from the debate between Graham Hancock and Flint Dibble on the Joe Rogan podcast. Introduction. Joe Rogan introduces the debate, expressing excitement and thanks to both guests for participating. Flint Dibble introduces himself as an archaeologist focused on educating about modern archaeological methods. Graham Hancock is recognized by Rogan as a frequent guest who discusses alternative historical theories. Flint Dibble's opening remarks emphasizes the role of archaeologists in sharing accurate historical knowledge and correcting misconceptions about the past. Explains the use of technology like LiDAR and data analysis in archaeology, showcasing how extensive the archaeological records are, e.g., maps showing numerous surveyed sites. Discusses the robustness of archaeological data, including large databases of various archaeological finds across different regions and time periods. Debate on Graham Hancock's lost civilization hypothesis. Flint challenges Hancock's hypothesis of a lost advanced Ice Age civilization, arguing there is no direct evidence or archaeological consensus supporting this theory. Points out the thorough work of archaeologists in investigating human history and their openness to new evidence. Highlights the rigorous methods used to date and understand ancient artifacts and sites, disputing the likelihood of an undiscovered advanced civilization. Graham Hancock's response defends his hypothesis by discussing the limitations of archaeological exploration and the potential for undiscovered sites, particularly underwater or in less explored regions. Questions the completeness of archaeological studies in certain areas like the Sahara Desert and the Amazon rainforest, suggesting that undiscovered remains could still exist. Argues that certain underwater structures and geological formations may be misinterpreted or not adequately studied for signs of ancient human activity. The debate touches on various aspects such as the role of new technology in archaeology, the impact of natural disasters on archaeological evidence, and the interpretation of ambiguous structures. Both sides discuss the implications of recent findings and technologies, like underwater archaeology and DNA analysis, which could potentially support or refute Hancock's hypotheses in the future. Closing remarks. Both participants reiterate their positions, with Flint emphasizing the importance of adherence to scientific rigor in archaeology, and Hancock advocating for a broader interpretation of available evidence. Rogan concludes the debate, thanking both guests for their contributions to a complex and intriguing discussion. This outline captures the major themes and arguments presented during the podcast, highlighting the contrast between established archaeological methods and alternative historical interpretations proposed by Hancock.
Well, thank you, ChatGPT. That was great.
So yes. It was, I thought it was a good debate. It had its moments. There was times where it got kind of personal.
Yeah.
There was times where both of them kind of weren't representing themselves well, in my opinion.
Yeah, they got very defensive of themselves, which for Graham, my initial thoughts after having listened to it for the first time was that Graham came into this a little bit more ready to fight and defend himself personally after being attacked since the Netflix series. So he prepared slides and a presentation to, combat those accusations and to attack Flint in a way and his organization. So he kind of came into this ready to fight.
He was ready for it to get personal, and he wanted to
have that.
He wanted to talk about the drama between them.
Yeah. Yes. Because like Graham talks about in the episode, let's just get this part out of the way because it does get contentious, and the vast majority of the argument was pretty amicable, like they had a decent debate, but then it started getting personal. So anyway, once it started getting contentious, like Joe realized it and needed him to take a break, chill out, talk about it a bit off mic, trying to calm the situation a bit.
And then they got the podcast off to a little bit more productive debating, in my opinion. After that, I feel like they both got a little bogged down in going at each other for kind of the first half of the whole thing.
I will say, I think Flint and all of the people who contributed to the information that Flint was presenting did a good job of presenting evidence that does directly and sometimes indirectly prove their point that archaeology knows a lot about the history, but it's still a narrative that they're coming up with as far as what the evidence means.
Yeah. So one of his main points was that we do know a lot about the Ice Age, the pre-Younger Dryas times, and what we know is that there were hunter-gatherers.
Right.
And we see it everywhere.
Right.
And Graham wasn't trying to dispute that. Nope. And I feel like it got really circular because he kept trying to drive that point home.
For a while there.
No, we know. It was almost as if he was trying to accuse Graham of saying it wasn't hunter-gatherers back then that existed. And that's not what Graham actually says.
Right.
Graham says that, of course there were hunter-gatherers. There's hunter-gatherers now.
Yeah. Which we've talked about in the previous episode on Graham's theory and stuff. It's he's mostly trying to get across the point that there was a major shift in the technology and the understanding of the world after the Ice Age and not before the Ice Age.
Right.
Which is why a lot of this evidence is being found after the Ice Age.
Yeah.
For agriculture, for advanced stone monuments and all these other things.
Yeah.
So there was some kind of transfer, in his words, the transfer of technology.
Yeah. I feel like Flint probably took... I don't know how he missed that point that just because Graham thinks there was a civilization back there that he's not arguing that the hunter-gatherers weren't there. And so Flint spent a ton of his time arguing the existence of hunter-gatherers.
Right.
Which was all
he could have moved on
kind of a waste because no one's saying they weren't there, not even Graham. And they could be there, and there could also be a bigger, a civilization. But
all right, well, before we dive too much deeper into this, we'll take a quick break.
Out, and we will be back shortly.
See you in a bit.
Adios. Welcome back.
We are back. I hit that note for a minute. Or split second, I mean.
You passed by it.
Ooh. You. There we go.
So, yeah.
Right, we're back. So, yeah, we finished by going through that intro and giving our own little takes on our impressions of the episode.
Yeah, we were talking about, specifically when we ended, we were talking about them kind of talking past each other.
Yeah.
Well, I guess Flint talking past Graham. Well, Graham, whichever way that goes.
They kind of both did it to each other.
Yeah.
But Graham was pretty firm in making sure he wasn't being misquoted, and because and it was pretty apparent in what Flint had to say and what he prepared for this debate, that he had a specific narrative of what he believes Graham is all about.
Right.
Like, they have this notion that he specifically claims a specific culture that was highly advanced, that had metallurgy and, like, you know, super advanced, all these things, like as if they were like some alien race, you know, or
as if they were like modern humans. But yeah,
even modern humans with the kind of technology we have now. And so a lot of Flint's debate and points he was making were kind of pointed in that direction of like we don't find these things. It's like we would expect, if there were an advanced culture, that we would find these proxies to, you know, show us that the evidence points to a lost ancient culture.
Right.
But what Graham constantly brings it back to is the fact that he's not talking about an advanced culture that has all the things we have now, technology and plastics and metals and all these things, but they were advanced in their science and in their knowledge of the universe,
of the stars,
and
the precession and
the ability to move megalithic stones, you know, and make them, you know, within a certain minuscule degree of true north and whatever different projections.
And this is kind of where like Graham's strategy comes in. I'm not sure like if you ever heard him talk on like sort of his strategy ever, but essentially what I've heard him comment on before is like his job, like he does not go nearly as far with his claims as a lot of people in the alternative movement do.
Will go, yeah.
Right. So like he doesn't even like cover like Ben Van Kerkwick's stuff, like with the
stone vases.
I've never heard Graham focus on like the scooping technology, the scoop marks in the quarries. He's usually pretty conservative with what he actually puts forward.
What he claims. Yeah.
What he claims in his work.
Yeah.
And I think he's commented that he does that on purpose because his job is already big enough. The main thing, like the role he's trying to play, is to try and open up the civilization,
the landscape,
as a legitimate archaeological point to be contended with.
Yeah, something that archaeologists there should be some facet of archaeology that is allowed to explore these ideas and point their money and grants towards these things without being shunned by the rest of the community as if they're pseudo archaeologists. Like, and that's what's happened in the past, and they covered that a bit too, of like the people who have been smeared. Smeared. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe we go to the list of bullet points here. But what other points was Flint making that actually? I mean, I know he made a few points that
there was really one point that I thought was really good, and I thought it was his strongest point of the entire debate. And I honestly need to contend with it and think about it and maybe do some further research to figure out like the details of how extensive this is. But essentially one of his big points was about like the big data that archaeologists employ by taking samples all over the world from all the archaeologists all over the world doing digs. They're able to... I forget the name of the sub-discipline he mentioned, but it was essentially the study of if you take core samples and then you look at the different like stratigraphic layers in it and you analyze the pollen that's in that layer.
Yeah.
So they're able to tell from the genetic details in the pollen in a layer how prevalent agriculture is in a particular area.
Yeah, the agriculture debate definitely made sense, and it hit pretty like it definitely hit in a sensitive spot with Graham. You could tell because it was just like, I mean, he was proving that before the Ice Age during the Ice Age there was no agriculture. The pollen samples showing that there was no large-scale agriculture going on in certain regions based on their core samples being reported all over the world.
And that's why I want to look into it further, because I have follow-up questions for that, right? Sure. Like, if everything he said and the way he portrays it is true, there's still follow-up questions, but essentially, so, like, if you do analyze the pollen, which pollen varieties are they analyzing? Which crops show the types of markers they're able to see in the pollen?
And what's the data?
Is it just the grass crops? What if whatever culture was pre-Ice Age
doing trees
happened to know about keto and had a low-carb diet and they weren't farming grasses?
Sure.
You know, like...
Sure, yeah.
So it's... If it's just like the grasses, they're able to see those markers in. Like, are they able to tell the prevalence? Are they able to see those same sorts of markers in fruit trees, or is it everything, or is it specific groups? Right. What if they were mostly carnivores and they were mostly using livestock? Like, is there an analog to the pollen sample for livestock keeping, animal husbandry?
Probably not.
I don't know, right? Like it the idea of sampling all over the world and looking at pollen, another follow-up question is, what sites along the world have they sampled? Are there big gaps? Have they sampled in the Amazon? Have they sampled in the Sahara? He says they did a bunch off the coast. Off what coast? Like, what is the coverage? Right. And then another follow-up question is, what is the range? Right.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
like I know pollen can travel really far because it's really tiny little molecules, but
that has to go into, like, there's all these different factors. Like there's the wind patterns and where they're going to land and all these different things that affect that. So if it's at a certain point and a certain type of pollen that you're looking at, it doesn't necessarily mean that, behind that wind current, there's not something other data that's going to tell you something completely different.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and the other thing is, like, have they studied the effects of cataclysms on the different markers they're looking for? Right. So, like, what type of difference would a Younger Dryas cataclysm have on the markers they look at? Could it affect the data? Could it affect the survivability of the pollen?
Yeah. And one of his points he made was the domestication of wheat and the markers that they look at, and how they talk about the scar, like the weak, it turns into like a strong form, and like how. Let
me recap that for the listeners. So, what his point was with wheat is that wheat is a grass, right? And so you got the shaft, and then you got like the stalk at the top, right?
Yep.
Or the sheaf or whatever, right? And that's the thing with the seed pod on it. And the way it attaches to the stalk of the plant, there's this little piece. And that piece in wild grasses is designed to not be able to undergo much physical stress. If an animal walks by and knocks into it, it's designed for that piece that keeps the seed pod attached to the stem. It's just designed to break. So that
to propagate it,
so that it can drop those seeds, hopefully get some on the animal that's crossing by, so the animal can move and take those seeds with them, right? That's how wild grasses function and propagate and spread. But what he said is that as soon as humans start to do agriculture, I missed the mechanism for this one, but apparently there's like an automatic mechanism evolutionarily, so that just the act of taking grasses and planting them causes the grasses to switch to a mutation where the piece that connects to the sheaf to the stalk doesn't break.
It's more hardy.
Yeah, basically that is more desirable for human farming.
The mechanism that he described was basically just a genetic mutation that a small percentage of the plants
already have anyway.
And so when humans start to harvest, or not harvest, but plant, they start to remove the seeds and plant them in new grasses. That genetic mutation, when planted in an unfamiliar soil, in a new field,
the ones with the tougher attachment will survive at a higher rate
because they
and also larger seed varieties will as well. So when you take a bunch of seeds from one field and then you use them to plant another field, and you usually drop more than one seed in an area, like you're dropping a bunch, and so they're competing for resources. And there's a phenomena with plants where usually the bigger seeds grow faster, and so the bigger seeds have a natural selection when they're planted together in a monocrop situation, where the biggest seeds will end up growing faster, and so their plants will survive where the small ones won't.
Because
and so it puts a selection pressure for the seeds to get bigger and bigger and bigger, which is more desirable for humans anyway.
Exactly, because humans want the thing that's going to grow the fastest. So whether they're specifically targeting it or because they're growing faster, they're just taking those seed pods quicker and replanting them, making those genetics move forward. Whereas the other ones who are born late, maybe they just, instead of planting them, they take those to consume themselves, right? They take them, or And so those genes don't pass on.
They just won't survive next to the more viable ones.
Right. They'll take all the resources in the soil. Yeah.
Right.
So it's fascinating how that happens.
Yeah. That's a really cool argument, is essentially like, and that's something I learned on this podcast, which I found fascinating, which is that just the act of planting, of taking seeds from a plant and planting it, and then taking seeds and planting, just the act of doing that without doing any breeding, any like human manipulation or selection,
some kind of splicing or something,
that automatically will start to put pressure on the plant to grow the strong connection and to have bigger seeds. Yep. And so over time, just the act of planting on its own will generate bigger seeds.
Yeah. And he talked about how long it takes,
which is thousands of
years. You start to see the markers for it within about 150 years, where it jumps up to a level where you can see. But after about 1,000 years, you can see almost 90%,
right,
or over 90% of the genetic variability of the plants in there have this genome to create these big seeds.
And so that's super fascinating, and I find it like really, like, I love that there are archaeologists out there studying the world this way.
So, but to caveat that is they follow that whole segment with Joe asking a really good question, is if those same domesticated plants were left without human intervention for thousands of years again,
how long would it take them to revert?
To revert to a feral plant.
How long would it take?
And he said that there is work being done, and the plants do revert to a feral state after being domesticated,
which he can only assume would also take thousands of years.
He could assume that, they haven't done it for thousands of years, obviously, but.
And wouldn't you know that the Younger Dryas is 1,200 years long?
Yep.
That's already 1,200 of the thousands of years you need.
Right.
Plus however long into the Ice Age it took for the agriculture to actually start. Plus whatever happened up in the lead up before the onset of the Younger Dryas.
Yep.
So it's still making the assumptions that people were using grains.
Well, and that people were large scale using agriculture as if like there's not some like slow process of introducing people to this, right? So if you were to go into a new place who's thriving, right, you're going from a place more north or more south where the ice caps are during the Ice Age or before the Ice Age, and you're bringing this knowledge of agriculture from your society, right? You bring it down to these people who are in tropic weather, and they have large abundance of food. They have animals. They have all the things they need. And even if you just introduce the idea, that doesn't mean instantaneously they're going to stop gathering and hunting for their main source. Sure, they might dabble in it, and you even see a 20 to 30% spike between the beginning, like fully wild plants and domestication, because even like you were saying before, when you walk by a wheat field and that seed drops on an animal, that's going to have the same effect over time if the same animals or more animals are traveling in that direction, and they take the seeds and they plant them in a new place, and that happens so regularly, it's going to have the same effect as humans doing that. Because it's the same idea, right? You're taking
not
the seeds
necessarily
and
if they're the ones that break off. The ones that break off, that will select for the ones that break off to be propagated. It's the ones that don't break off that humans are responsible for propagating.
It's not saying that they can't break off. It's just saying that they're stronger,
right?
And they have the genetic mutation. It's not even that they were stronger at the time. They had the genetic mutation within them. So even the first wild crops that were taken by humans, a lot of them were weak stocks that would fall off easily, but they had the genetic marker within them to be able to morph.
Well, think about it. If you got like a cart, or you're dragging a bunch of stuff with you, and say you have a bundle of wheat that you're taking with you to plant somewhere, as you're traveling and like the shaking, like a bunch of those weak stalks are going to fall and drop and not make it to where you're going to do your planting.
Right. But so what he was saying specifically,
even the act of like transporting them will weed out some of the weak stalks.
Some of it, yeah, but that's why there's this long period, is because it's not an instantaneous thing, because you still have these weak stocks, who are the more abundant ones, and even the weak stocks are the ones who have the genetic variability to be able to morph once transported and planted into a new place.
No. What he was saying is that in that grass population, there's a certain percentage of them that have this mutation and a certain percentage that have the other mutation. And so a certain number have the weak and a certain number have the stronger.
Oh, I see. So it wasn't... Okay. I misunderstood that then.
Yeah. But, I mean, I think those are all good points. But, again, those follow-up questions that I stated, like, I just don't know. I would like to learn more about it. Like, how fully covered do they have this?
Yeah.
Because unless they're covering all the different like food sources, it's not necessarily an open and shut case. And it also assumes like monocropping, big farming, which we know, well, we have suggestions based on the Amazon and the Amazon dark earths and the different sorts of like crop manipulations that have happened in the jungle there. That, you know, maybe some ancient cultures had a different idea of how to do this farming thing in the first place. Yeah. And so maybe you wouldn't see the same sort of effects. I mean, if they truly, so Graham doesn't claim that they're this advanced, but like after you check out the Uncharted X stuff on the vases that are mathematically precise and all the like the precision tooling that they can do that some of it we can't do.
Right.
You know, like once you have the bigger picture that Graham's not putting forward, that they actually are probably quite advanced.
Right.
They're it makes sense that they would have a different approach to farming.
Yeah.
And maybe their early agriculture phase where you would be able to find that evidence is just even further back in time. Mm-hmm. And that archaeologists don't look back that far for that evidence because they don't expect to find the results.
Yeah, and if you go by a lot of these myths of ancient culture being destroyed and, you know, a few people settling amongst the hunters and gatherers and propagating their knowledge and, you know, exchange of knowledge to help them survive. Like, and then there's all these other, you know, things of people back then being different, you know, slightly different from us and having a slightly different genetic makeup. Like going into the weeds a bit on this whole theory, like they, like 1,000 years could have survived that, like if they're on their own, right? With the help of the hunter-gatherers. So the amount of time for the prior domesticated plants to die off and become wild again is very real.
Yeah.
And he kind of ignores that, and Graham doesn't really press him on it. Mm-hmm. The fact that the Younger Dryas happened over a long period of time, and that society that he's claiming could have been destroyed, and all the agriculture could have been, you know, reverted back into wild plants by that time. But and then with the idea that once you do propagate, it's still going to take thousands of years for them to figure it out and re-domesticate because they're using the local plants.
Right.
So wherever that culture was, they had a different local plant that they were using. That whether it was wiped out or not, it has already been reverted back to wild because they're no longer in that local area until the ice recedes, until you can get back into that area a thousand years later or whatever.
Right.
So yeah, you would, even with the pollen, you would expect to find evidence of domesticated plants in that region. But if you're not looking in the region where those societies may have lived, and they might have lived underwater, all the stuff that you could possibly want to date or dew could be underwater, and just be gone.
Yeah, I mean we've had 400 feet of ocean rise since the Younger Dryas, and
like they
not
spell
all
out
of that was in the Younger Dryas, but like
over the
200 to 300
of
feet of it was in the immediate Younger Dryas event.
Yeah,
and then the rest of that was over time.
Yeah,
but 400 feet of ocean level is a ton of new land.
Yeah.
And Graham kept pressing him on, like how much actual ocean archaeology you do. And Flint tried to make the point.
Shipwrecks.
Yeah. Well, so Graham talks about this a lot in his books. He's like, there is ocean archaeology that happens, but like 95% of it is all dedicated to shipwrecks.
Yeah. 100%. 95%.
And so Graham's point is there's not enough just pure archaeology for archaeology's sake happening
underwater on any of these continental shelves.
Whereas Flint kind of inverts that point and says, yeah, but we're looking for a lot of stuff when we look at these shipwrecks. We're taking all sorts of sampling and we are building a picture of the past through these shipwrecks as well.
To a certain point. Yeah.
Right. He also made a point that I thought was interesting, which is that water and catastrophes are potentially good at preserving things, right?
True.
So he argues,
that's what he said, yeah.
Right. He argues, like, for instance, Vesuvius, like, because of the Vesuvius eruption, we have a perfectly preserved city under the ash that we're able to do archaeology on.
Right. Yeah, he says that cataclysms and destruction are actually a friend to archaeology because it perfectly preserves a lot of these sites,
right?
That are eventually abandoned.
Right. He gives it another analogy of like if a nuclear bomb goes off, right? Like everything within like the immediate range is going to get fried, right? Sure. But everything further out that still can't survive in that area and has to leave, like they're going to drop everything and leave. And now that's a whole bunch of shit in the area that no one's going to touch. And it's going to just start having stuff accumulate over it. And it's going to be preserved to be found later. And that's a good point. But I don't think... I don't get the impression he takes the scale of the cataclysm seriously at all.
Yeah.
Because he also just doesn't think the Younger Dryas was a cataclysm.
Right. That's what I gathered. He doesn't specifically say that.
He doesn't.
But he definitely infers that.
But he's referring to the rebuttal articles against the YDIH theory, the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. And those articles, I've gone over them. I've read them, and I'm not particularly impressed. They seem to just be calling out the entire Comet research group as like people who can't tell the difference between little pieces of poop and carbon microspherules. Like literally, they said a bunch of these are just insect poop. And I have a hard time like taking a accusation like that seriously when you have a group of 60 credentialed scientists from universities all over the world with high, experience. And like these aren't just like, this isn't a bunch of Graham Hancocks making this argument.
Right. Yeah. It's not a bunch of journalists going around and collecting evidence. These are the people doing the research.
Yeah.
And the fact that we live near we have the interaction with the Comet group twice a year. The what's the name of the comet?
The Torrid Meteor
Stream. Yeah. Like we are in contact with that twice a year. Whether they come to within our atmosphere or not, we go through that twice a year. And eventually something's going to happen.
Right.
Like, it's just that simple, really. Things happen. And he's not even claiming that it's going to happen again at the same magnitude, or that there was like, there's some conspiracy around it or anything.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he's just saying like there's myths about it around the world from multiple cultures.
Right.
And they talk about these similar stories.
Right.
And then Flint gets into like that, or Graham wants to defend him like about all the being racist and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And how he cites a bunch of...
That's a whole can of worms, and we should cover that, but let's hit this next break.
Okay.
And then we'll jump into some of that drama before getting back to some of the more interesting points. Alrighty, we'll be back. Welcome back.
We back. And where were we?
Yeah, I was just gonna say.
Nah.
Let's see. I don't know where we were. Oh yeah, I know where we were. We were just about to talk about the like personal drama there.
Yes. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So
the shots fired.
Yeah. So after Ancient Apocalypse, Graham Hancock's Netflix series, which if you haven't seen it, what are you doing?
Just gotta,
stop and go watch that. That he started getting articles written about him and pot shots fired, and there was a archaeological organization of which Flint is a part that wrote to Netflix requesting it to be reclassified as science fiction rather than as documentary.
And that's the SAA. That's the South American Archaeologists. That's the group. I think.
I don't remember what the exact organization was.
I think that's right.
Okay.
We'll fact check. We'll fact check ourselves. Fact check ourselves. That's a tongue twister.
Well, you fact check us, or we can ask GPT.
Let's do it.
What was the archaeological organization that wrote to Netflix to have Graham Hancock's episode reclassified as science fiction?
This is much slower than reading an entire episode and giving us your summary.
The organization that wrote to Netflix to have Graham Hancock's series reclassified as science fiction was the Society for American Archaeology, SAA. They expressed concerns about the presentation of Hancock's theories as factual and argued that his views, which challenge established archaeological understanding without substantial evidence, should be categorized under fiction rather than documentary. This was part of a broader discussion about how media platforms should handle content that presents alternative theories on historical and scientific subjects.
Right. And Netflix was like, F off. We're going to keep it, which good for them.
Yeah.
But anyway, as part of that whole thing, there was something that, like, I think it was an interview. Wasn't it an interview?
It was an interview
that he did.
Flint Dibble that he did with a journalist who reached out to him after Graham Hancock had announced that they were going to be doing this debate on Joe Rogan's podcast. So that's an important point. It is valid in the sense of, like, he wouldn't have normally had access to journalists who are doing a story. Like, they're not coming after Flint Dibble to get the hottest scoop on archaeology, outside of the fact that now Graham Hancock, who's pretty well known now that he has a Netflix documentary and has been on Joe Rogan this many years.
He's already been prolific, but that blew him up again. And
so the announcement of that brought people their attention to Flint Dibble, and he made a statement.
Right. And the statement was, like, to the effect of that Graham should be separating himself or acknowledging differences of opinion with the sources that he quotes.
Right.
So
he should be verbally and like prolifically like exclaiming that he denounces their views, but still is using their
he's essentially saying if Graham Hancock's gonna quote the Spaniards, he needs to be denouncing the Spaniards. And fair enough, I guess.
Sure.
He does denounce the Spaniards plenty in his work.
Right. If you take him out of context in a certain quote he's making from somebody who...
I mean, as someone who's taken in almost everything Graham Hancock has ever written, like, he has no love for the Spaniards. Like, he does not portray them as good guys in history. He complains about them quite a lot. He blames them for a lot of the destruction of the knowledge of the Americans.
Yep. And that's taking them out of context, because you're taking a quote from a specific thing just the same way they don't like being misquoted.
Yeah.
Like, it's all these misquoting going back and forth, and that's where a lot of this contention comes from. And it's a lot of this just misunderstanding and human tendencies to want to smear your opposition, you know?
So, like, kind of the way even he portrayed himself as wording it to the journalist was still, like, I thought was a low blow and not a fair point. Like, I'm sorry. Like, if you've ever actually read Graham's stuff, like, he does not portray, like, to himself, like, he does not agree with all the sources he quotes. He doesn't claim to. He does criticize them a lot. He does point out when he has a source, like, there's a couple, like, scientists he's worked with and talked about certain things with, and they may have a crackpot theory in a different part of their research, but he will say, I'm not interested in that. I'm talking to them about this.
Right. When they say this, I don't agree with that, or I'm not associated with that. I don't have any interest in that. And what I'm really asking them is this, and this is the answer I'm asking them about. So
like with Robert Schoch and
accepting all of their views because he's interviewing them.
Right. Like with Robert Schoch and the Sphinx stuff, like, he uses Robert Schoch's evidence to talk about the Sphinx dating, but he also doesn't agree with Robert Schoch's view that this is all solar induced.
Right. Or that Robert Schoch on Yonaguni, I think it was, that underwater site.
He disagrees with Graham.
He doesn't agree with
that one.
Graham, and Graham's like, okay, that's fine, but I still, like, your point on this, is valid.
Right.
And I could see that being misconstrued as like cherry picking, or like only picking Robert Schoch stuff when it agrees with your narrative.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he does, and I don't know that Robert Schoch's commented on it, because I'm sure he's more tight-lipped since a lot of this, media that's probably come his way since Joe Rogan and Graham Hancock and all that. But, I can imagine him just, I could imagine, like, this big archaeology, like they alluded to, having a narrative and like wanting him to like stay within it, and that's where his grants are, that's where his livelihood is. And he went on a few dives with Graham to Yonaguni, and this is all Graham telling a story of what happened. Like, you don't hear Robert Schoch say this, but he was agreeing that it was a man-made site, but later said that he changed his mind. Yeah. Right. So
for the public appearance of it anyway.
Right.
That's
the whole thing. Like, you might agree in personal, but your personal can't be crossed over into your professional.
Yeah.
When you're in archaeology, when you're in government funded, research, or you're in whatever kind of research, however it's funded, there's political views and there's all these different agendas, and they're looking for this, and this, and they don't want to hear anything about that, and that,
Yeah. The other thing, though, like, to be more fair to Flint's point, is what he was kind of specifically talking about, that he disagreed with Graham on, is his kind of coverage of the whole Quetzalcoatl character. Right. And he brings on like a specific person to talk about it, right? And
they made sense. A lot of that made sense.
Yeah, and they're essentially saying that the modern understanding is now that the Spaniards essentially bastardized some of the native beliefs once they arrived. They kind of forced them to change and made them more like white centric. And so the whole like legend that Quetzalcoatl was like some pale, like other lander who came in is probably not what the natives actually thought before the Spaniards arrived.
Yeah. Their idea of it was much different, I'm sure.
Right. And that our impression of that is just the impression we get handed down by the Spaniards who reported back on what the native beliefs were.
True.
And so that those
and essentially it almost like a self prophesizing thing.
Right.
It's like the Spaniards telling them, they believe that this, like they believe that I am a god.
Yeah.
And if I go back down there, they're, like.
Right. And so, maybe Graham does have to update his sources there, because I would take the like native understanding more seriously than I would take the Spaniards, right? Like, that's why it's so disappointing that we lost all that knowledge when the Spaniards burned everything, because we lost our ability to like
learn about what their culture
get the info from the source.
About.
Right.
Yeah.
So as close to the sources we can get, if they have a difference of opinion, I mean, I guess I would take them more seriously, probably.
Yeah.
So, but that's the thing. If you read Graham's work, and if Graham like contends with that idea, I don't think it's important to Graham the color of the skin of the people who come and share civilization, right? If the character is still the same and the overriding narrative is still the same, like who gives
what they look like?
What they look like? Like, and he's essentially accusing Graham of like saying that these cultures' great accomplishments were not due to them; they were due to some outsider, and that is racist.
Yeah,
and it's like perpetuating the problematic views. And then the journalist he gave that interview to turn that into like some straight up woke like journalistic article. And then there was a whole blow up like that went directed towards Graham, and that really like messed with Graham's head, because
he's been doing this for his entire life. He's not a racist person, and he does attribute certain cultural backgrounds to facial features when he talks about those Olmec heads found in South America. And him and Joe talk about it, and and basically Flint was just like, look, this is not how the science is done on these things. And he basically just kept with the woke idea of like maintaining order in the overall narrative that is supposed to be pushed by a government agency,
Yeah.
Whatever might
Whereas
be representing
Graham
the
is
government
trying
in any
to
way.
look at the carvings, look at what they look like, analyze them, and compare them against what we see out there in the world.
Yeah.
And it is true that different cultures from different parts of the world have different like prominences of different features, right? There are looks to like different facial structures that are associated more with this or that nationality or race, right? Like it's just part of human diversity,
Or the mixing of everything in
So,
like the
I don't
variety.
I don't think it's racist to look at what features are portrayed on a statue if they happen to coincide with like features of human population groups. Like what's racist about that?
Yeah, we're just observing. It's the PC kind of mentality of it all, just trying to like keep it out of their lane. You know, as an archaeologist, he doesn't want to have to comment on those things, especially in the highly contentious.
Yeah, and I get that.
World.
Like today's environment is kind of a terrifying one. Like if
Distance himself from it. Yeah.
If you're any sort of scientist in the past who studied like racial traits of humans, and then this culture war breaks out, like you gotta be very careful like with anything you say.
Yeah, absolutely. And you don't want to it's probably highly advantageous for other disciplines to just keep their distance.
And there's weird moral arguments.
Sure.
And I get it. Like you don't necessarily want a bunch of scientists and lab coats trying to pick apart the differences between people, which like what are the outcomes of that going to be? Probably not good for some.
And because Graham and Joe are commentators on the establishment and pop culture and all these things, like they are louder voices. Like they are able to just say what is true and like say they're, without having to maintain this, narrative or culture.
And, Graham isn't claiming to know what the truth is. He's just suggesting like this needs more research, right? Like he never claimed himself to be an archaeologist. He claims himself to be
he praises archaeologists too, and he praises archaeologists in a large way in a lot of his works.
Yeah, so much of the show was like taken up by that. That was a little disappointing to me. I would have liked them to spend more time on substantive issues.
Especially with agriculture specifically. They did get into like Göbekli Tepe and stuff a bit. And we were, dancing around it a bit when we were talking about the Neolithic period of like humans and like the Stone Age people.
Yeah. I don't recall what was Flint's disagreement on the Göbekli Tepe.
So he was basically claiming that there was no agriculture and there was no evidence of agriculture. But Graham kept citing Abu Huraira, which I believe is nearby. I can't remember how far it is, but it's nearby in the region. And Graham is basically just saying that there's agriculture nearby, and it's from even before Göbekli Tepe. Or it's younger than Göbekli Tepe. But Göbekli Tepe dates back the farthest in the region, I believe. And Graham is basically just saying that there's, signs of them being technologically advanced in the way that they're able to move these stones. And especially back then, like what makes it so that they have enough time to do these things as being, hunter-gatherers.
Well, also, we're still at the very beginning of excavating.
Göbekli Tepe even itself.
Even Göbekli Tepe itself. But like the entire area is strewn with these things that have not been excavated yet.
Right.
And
Karahan Tepe, and there's all the other tepes.
I tend to side with Graham Hancock with the attitude that scientists have.
Sure.
Like, it comes off as arrogant when they state things so
adamantly.
Yeah.
They're
careful. They don't exactly state things for a fact. They'll just say, no,
it's just
this is the theory.
It's just adamant. Like
because this is what the evidence is for. Right. Like,
this is our newest theory, latest version 7,000.
I just wish the attitude in science was more as long as we don't know for sure which of a thing is correct, we should be looking at both and taking both seriously. Even if one is statistically more significant than the other, we should still be taking them both seriously. Maybe they don't get the same amount of funding, but that doesn't mean you ignore the one that is statistically less significant. You just, you know.
Well, and specifically, if you're talking about like archaeologists who are independent and they're amateur, sure, they're amateur, but they still are working in that field. Right. And they're still finding things.
Archaeology complains about funding all the time. They should instead try and incorporate the amateurs and the pseudo archaeologists.
And I think we're getting into a generation. I took a couple screenshots from this where Flint popped up a couple of YouTube channels for archaeology on YouTube. And there's a bunch of these different channels. So I took a screenshot. I want to check some of them out.
I've checked out. I've seen at least a couple of those channels.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of them, but I think there's a good list. And then there's some podcasts. Like, it'd be fascinating to actually hear what
almost every single one I do see. Almost everyone I do see of those, and I haven't watched all those channels. I would like to go through that list too and see if I can find someone who's kind of respectful with what they disagree on. But a lot of them just come off as arrogant, man. Like they really, really try to lay on the ad hominems, and they talk crap and they talk down and they ridicule. And that I don't care if your points are good. If you're coming at me with that attitude, like, I have a hard time listening and taking you seriously.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I mean,
like, if I'm looking at someone with that attitude and someone with Graham Hancock's attitude, you know, like, I know Graham Hancock's not right on everything. That's fine. But like, he's open-minded and he's exploring interesting ideas. You are arrogant and preaching to me and telling me what is right and wrong when you clearly don't know. We have so much left to learn. Yep.
There's so much more of the world to discover, and deeper, right? Like, you know, things move, things change, things layer up, and maybe we're just not going deep enough for a truly distant ancestor like that lived 400,000 years ago, like the onset of the, I guess, what is it, 200 and something thousand years ago that like the modern humans come about? Or is it back to 400?
It's back to like 3 or 4. Yeah.
Still,
it's at least 300, but I think it's further back.
Yeah. I mean, what's to say that they're the same, like, anatomically modern humans way back then?
Yeah.
They have our brain structure. And they have our, you know, abilities, whatever that might be. And, you know, 400,000 years is a long time when we're talking about, like, within the last couple thousand years, how much we've progressed.
Right.
And just because they're new, they would still use the environment this similar way we would.
Yeah.
So why couldn't there be multiple iterations of humans being on Earth where they go through these periods of like great wealth, and then they're brought down because the Earth is going to do what the Earth does over hundreds of thousands of years. Anything can happen, or tens of thousands of years every epoch.
And you just have to assume that you know so much in order to like be confident that that couldn't have happened. And I know this sounds like a circular backwards argument. Like, this is not an argument for why it's true. This is just an argument about why you shouldn't you shouldn't fight people for even having the idea.
The opinion, yeah.
Yeah. Or just like trying to pursue studying it.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah, that's just not going to do anybody any good. Like, all it's going to do is just cause contention. And
I think some of it too comes from like a sort of competition for resources amongst scientists, you know?
Yeah, there's like limited grant money.
They see something out there getting grant money, right? Yeah. And they get up in arms because they think they should be funded, not that person over there studying pseudo archaeology.
Right. You know, I mean, Graham probably still has more resources than Flint Dibble, even.
I mean, as an individual, probably, but I'm sure Flint has access. I mean, he's
to a different level
right. Yeah. I think through his grants, he probably has access to the type of money that he needs to employ the types of tools he needs to do his work as an archaeologist.
Yeah, and his work's more pointed at whatever his subject is. So, yeah.
Whereas
that money goes a lot further.
Yeah.
And what Graham is doing with such a wide net.
Yeah. But I think it was a good debate, though. The Egypt stuff was interesting, about the Sphinx. Flint just basically discounts archaeoastronomy. Not necessarily totally full cloth, but like almost all of the alignments and weirdness about the pyramids and the connection with Orion and the Sphinx and the connection with Leo. Like, he just basically says no. He doesn't really give his reason why. He just says no.
I mean,
well, his main reason why is because he knows how it did happen, and that's not it. It happened a lot earlier, or a lot more recently.
Yeah.
And under different circumstances. He says there's no evidence of Egyptians employing any advanced tooling or anything. And that's where, like, I wish Graham had someone like Ben with him. Yeah. Because I would love to I would love for Ben to be there to hop in and be like, well, actually, and just pop out and do his slides, because what could he say to a lot of that evidence?
Dude, some of those vases are like paper thin and you could shine a light through them.
Yeah, like, they're translucent. What? They're made out of like fragile, hard granite.
You have to have so much precision to not break that.
Well, specifically that one vase that, like, it looks like it's lathed, except for the fact that there's these two handles on the side of it.
And don't make it a smooth surface.
Right. So those two handles that are on the side of it that are cut out of the same piece of stone, they make it so you couldn't lathe turn to cut that. So if we were going to manufacture it today, the only way we can get the accuracy of the levels and the planes that it has is to use our 5D printing machines and 5D like grinders and cutters, laser technology and shit, space age stuff, to get that level of accuracy across all of the different planes with the curves. And like, you know, like, it looks so smooth that it could have been lathed, but you know it couldn't be because those handles would have been cut off if it was lathed.
Yeah, unless the lathe was a laser moving over the surface of the larger like going on and off it in certain areas, and able to make it a certain shape,
right,
3-dimensionally.
And there's that paper that Ben covers that essentially makes that argument. There's like the computer scientist, the cryptographer guy who analyzes it and shows all the mathematics that is written, and he shows that like there's a formula you can write that represents that shape. And he makes the conclusion that you would need a Turing machine, a computer, aka, in order to create it.
Or sound. Using sound.
Yeah, well, some sort of computation technology. It doesn't have to be like silicon chips. There's lots of ways to make computation happen. Anyway.
Yeah.
I thought Flint was a little weak on the Egypt stuff.
He basically cited that the stones found that built the Sphinx were found from a nearby quarry or something. It's like, okay, right. I don't know that he dated it. I don't know that he could have dated it anyway.
No, well, what he was saying is that some of the other stuff built near the Sphinx was built with stones cut from the Sphinx.
Oh, right.
Because the Sphinx, they had to remove a bunch of rock to make it. The Sphinx is cut out of bedrock.
Oh, right.
So all of the rock they had to remove in order to create the Sphinx, some of those rocks are part of other constructions.
Right.
And those constructions they do have dates on, because people leave organic material between the blocks and stuff, and they can, carbon date a lot of stuff that way. But you can't carbon date the stone.
And you can't tell when that stone was put there in that position where you found it.
No, you can. If you put a stone down and then there's like pollen and other carbonate matter.
Oh, I see.
And then you put another stone on top, you're sealing organic matter in there that you can then later carbon date.
Sure, but
so you can tell when a stone got put on a stone, but you can't date the stone. That doesn't tell you when the stone was quarried.
That's what I mean. Yeah. That's what I mean. Is like, even though you're getting that date, that's just when those two rocks were sat on top of each other.
Right.
That doesn't tell you how long ago it sat on the side of a quarry ready to be put in place.
And we also know that the Egyptians were notorious for reusing stone.
Yeah, so they would moved multiple times.
Right. So not all of the dates are as solid as they claim they are. So just because you can date some stone that comes from the Sphinx enclosure, that doesn't date the Sphinx, because you can date when that stone got in that temple, but that doesn't tell you
what happened before that,
when the Sphinx was cut. It doesn't mean the Sphinx was cut right as that stone went there.
Right. It didn't go straight from there to there. Like, it sat around somewhere.
It could have been sitting in a block for thousands of years before it got used.
Exactly.
But, or it could have been in multiple different structures and made its way around, Yeah,
and every time leaving a different marker, but it was found there.
Right. So,
makes sense.
I didn't think he was super strong on that.
Yeah, I don't think he was prepared for it. I don't think he was as prepared for that, because I don't know how much research he's done on that himself.
And then he just straight up asserts that no, geologists say that's not weathering, that's not water erosion on the Sphinx enclosure.
Just dismissing it.
Joe's like, well, I've heard a lot of geologists say it is. And he's like, well, not most of them. And
he's like,
Joe's like,
well, how many?
Graham, how many geologists do you think? And he's like, I've heard a lot of geologists say that's water erosion. And the guy's like, no. It's like, come on. If you're a geologist out there, look at the weathering on the Sphinx enclosure and tell us if it's water erosion.
Yeah,
in your opinion.
Please write to us. We want to know for sure. Unless we just got to go there, read a manual about water erosion on that specific type of stone.
Yeah, right.
And then we'll be set. We'll do it ourselves.
I think it's a pretty good argument that it's water erosion.
Yeah.
Because people who say it's not, they don't really have a good argument. Like, how are they saying it happened then? Because it's not sand. Sand looks different.
Yeah, I think they just dismiss it as being like a longer period or shorter period of time or something. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
That would be the only thing they could really say. Is how long it lasted or something.
Yeah.
How long the rain and like flooding lasted.
And then Flint was like, the one time I went to Egypt, it was raining. And then he's like, sometimes a little bit of rain does way more than a lot of rain as far as erosion goes. And, maybe he's right, but that doesn't sound right.
That doesn't sound right. Doesn't sound right at all.
No.
Well, he definitely did make it clear that he wasn't a geologist. So.
That's true. Yeah. I don't know. I don't think he was totally prepared. I loved his agriculture stuff. I thought it was super fascinating. I want to know more about it.
Yeah. I would love to hear more about that. I think it's cool that they can do that. I want to hear more if they can, determine what kind of what are they looking for and where are they finding it and what species?
Because he named it as a particular field, and if it's a new burgeoning field, I hope it really takes off, because that technique sounds super powerful. Like, if you could take a worldwide survey and just go back in time, as deep as you can, in a number of places all over the globe, and the way you do science with the ice core layers in Greenland, you do that with the pollen layers, and it's just a big neutral project doing the data on it.
Yep.
Kind of like the Human Genome Project, where they're just analyzing the human genome, right?
That would be cool.
And you just do this as a big project and let the data speak for itself, because you might find that
still get people
you
who
see
interpret it
some
differently,
agriculture pop up in places that you wouldn't have expected. I just don't.
2 p.m.
What?
I don't know what that was. I think it was my watch.
Maybe your watch, yeah.
His phone.
Oh, it made me lose my point too.
Oh, damn it, Siri.
We were talking about the pollen. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So if you make
ice
it like
cores.
a big project, like the ice
yeah.
cores or like the Human Genome Project, I just think, you'll probably see. Yeah, that's where I was going. I was saying like modern. I just don't know what that science, how distributed their samples are, how deep in the layers are they going? Like, are they only going back like up to a certain place, like maybe halfway through the last ice age, or you know, like maybe they're not going back far enough to catch early enough in civilization where they would see primitive farming like we do now.
Yeah,
you know?
I wonder how deep you would have to go for that.
Because you would think if there was an advanced civilization before the ice age,
it'd have to have been like 30,000 years ago.
Well, they would have to have their own history of advancing.
Yeah.
Right? So for us, we got from Stone Age to, you know, Information Age in, you know, 4 or 5, 6,000 years. Okay. But whoever was advanced before the Ice Age or during the Ice Age, like they would have to have their own development history, and maybe theirs goes back even longer. And so maybe they're just not looking far enough in the past to find the pollen evidence.
Yeah, and maybe this was a slow decline of their civilization, and still by the end of it, there was people left that eventually settled.
Right.
And became a part of the people who were living indigenously at the time.
I just think if they actually were advanced, maybe they knew how to live with the earth a little better, so they didn't leave all the footprints that we leave, you know.
Right.
And not even the same.
Which isn't that hard to imagine.
Gatherers.
Like we all imagine that every day. Like it's not that hard to imagine to manage, you know.
And what more, right? What more in tune with the earth way is there to live than like being a master of stone and being able to like take gigantic stones and use them as permanent structures that keep themselves cool. You don't need air conditioning.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. That's a good point.
Like that's actually pretty advanced.
More badass than what we got, because they're using the earth directly without making all these synthetic stuff to like manipulate it, and using plastics and all these other things, these biocarbonates and stuff. Right.
They don't have to deal with like inhaling insulation dust when they crawl through their attic.
Yep. Exactly. They just figured it out while using the materials that were there. So when a destruction happens, you're going to have just artifacts of, you know, probably antiquity.
Yeah.
You know?
The other thing that's really convincing to me, and I would love someone like Flint to deal with it, is like the points that the Brothers of the Serpent did in their Egypt presentation.
Oh, yeah.
Where like...
Yeah, they covered like a lot of the block smoothing and the scoop marks and the...
Well, and especially the evidence that like the reason why there's so many blocks that go around corners is because they would build the blocks and oversized and then shave them back. Which, if that is in fact the case, that is such a massive undertaking. That is not something you do with copper age technology.
And the amount of times they've done it.
Yeah. That's something you do because you
it's
just, it's not hard for you to do it, or, you know.
Yep.
Either it's not hard for you to do it, or it's an engineering project and you need precision, right?
Yeah, it's built for some specific reason. It has certain specs, right? It's so fascinating.
All right, well, I think we should make this a little bit of a shorter one this time. Drew's got some stuff going on in the morning.
Gotta get up early.
So we will be back next time, I think, with some more Secret History.
Yep.
And then I think we also have Reincarnation coming up. I'm reading on that right now.
Oh, yeah.
So there's a little tease. If you enjoyed the show today, leave us a like and a thumbs up or leave us a like, hit subscribe on YouTube.
Comment, email.
Let us know your thoughts on the topics.
Hit us in the chat on Facebook or Instagram.
Yep. You can always find show notes for every episode on our website, dualitycheck.net/whatever the episode number is.
Yep. Any podcast platform you like, pretty much now, right? Love it. All right, y'all. See you next time.